Two people have emailed me this video from the Fatima Center, Medjugorje, true or false. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to splice this video in with Father Leon's replies to many of the things in this video so that people can see both sides of the argument. Now, as I've said a million times, I don't follow the Medjugorje apparitions. I have known very little about it. In a practical sense, I don't follow the things. I do know many friends that have gone to Medjugorje and have lifelong conversion in their lives. Like they're simply different people, and it has spurred them on in the spiritual life. So I've seen the practical consequences of going there. And in reality, whether there's supernatural phenomenon or not, whether it's a real or apparition or not, if a priest goes there in good faith and is offering confession and is doing the devotions, well, obviously he's bringing the graces that God has given him in his ministry to souls. So look, we just have to let the church decide. But on the deeper level, the Fatima Center has this video. I just want to put the responses from Father Leon together. And as I said, I have no skin in the game here. I'm not either one or the other side. My personal preference, as I said, I like Knock. I live beside Knock. I find great peace here in Ireland. I've never considered going to Medjugorje, but as I said, I have to do what Christ tells me. And when he puts people in my life, when he says he will speak to me in his church, and people know the history why I'm going to Medjugorje at the end of the month. When these things happen in my life, I have to be attentive. Okay, what do you want me to what message are you going to give me if I go there? Who am I going to meet? Maybe there's a priest there I need to talk to. I don't know. I have to leave it to the Holy Spirit to work, and I have to discern carefully. So that's be careful in that area. But I've just put the splice together so people can see, and as I said, I really have no interest in the phenomenon at the moment. For me, the Eucharist is the greatest apparition in my life. Going to the Eucharist is the greatest joy for me anywhere. An adoration chapel, going to adoration for me, I would gladly, if I had a local adoration chapel here, I'd gladly spend my spiritual time there, and that's where I get nourished. That's where I feel at peace and so forth. So, I'm just letting it out there. So anyway, enjoy this video. I hope I'm using fair use from the different areas. I hope Fatima Center doesn't come after me saying I'm just trying to splice together the criticisms and the responses to those, so that people can see both sides. That's all I'm trying to do. Okay. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.
I'd like to talk about one particular false apparition. In June of 1981, 6 young people from Croatia went up a hill near the village of Medjugorje in what was then rural Yugoslavia. When the 6 youngsters came down, they said that they had seen, quote-unquote, the Gospa, the Croat word for lady. The local bishop was initially open to their claims of seeing the Blessed Mother, but after he interviewed them and learned the full story, he knew that it was a complete hoax. As the years have passed since that time, and the false reports of the apparitions have continued, there has been more and more evidence of the full deception and fraud surrounding the idol of Medjugorje. Let's begin with the glaring theological errors in connection with this false apparition. The error of religious indifferentism is present within this false apparition. In a sense, it's as if the Madonna has embraced Freemasonry. The idol of Medjugorje stated to the supposed visionaries that, quote, all religions are equal before God, unquote. The false messenger continued with the revelation that, quote, the Muslims and the Orthodox, like the Catholics, are equal before my son and before me, for you are all my children, unquote. Even though the Catholic Church is not a denomination, but rather the one true religion outside of which no one can be saved, the false idol taught differently, stating that, quote, God directs all denominations as a king directs his subjects through the medium of his ministers, unquote. In fact, the Gospel claimed that the holiest person in the local villages in and around Medjugorje was an unbaptized, idolatrous Muslim woman named Pasha, who excelled all the baptized in holiness. The errors of this false apparition are also seen in regard to the sinlessness of the Virgin and her role as mediatrix of all graces and all intercession. Unlike at Lourdes, the apparition at Lourdes, the true apparition, where the Blessed Mother only prayed the Apostles' Creed and the Glory Be during her recitation of the Holy Rosary, at Medjugorje, the idol prays the prayer of sinners, namely the Our Father, where the harlot of Medjugorje asks that her trespasses be forgiven. Seriously? When asked by the 6 young people if they and others should approach the Blessed Mother for her intercession, knowing that all graces pass through her hands, the false idol stated, quote, I do not dispose of all graces. Jesus prefers that you address your petitions directly to him rather than through the intermediary like me, unquote. Near universalism is present also, or the heresy that states that all men are saved, when the idol reports that most every soul today in the modern world ends up in purgatory, in other words, saved.
Another objection to Medjugorje is based on some of the alleged messages of Medjugorje, as though some of them might be contrary to our faith. For example, there's an early message where I think the context was a little Serbian Orthodox boy was cured, and apparently I think a Franciscan priest expressed surprise at this. Now you have to understand, in the former Yugoslavia there are a good number of ethnicities. There are Slovenes, Croats, Serbs, Muslims who are now called Bosniaks. Okay, that was their ethnicity. Montenegrins and Macedonians, at least 6. They're all closely related to each other, and in fact, Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs are really, really closely related to each other. The language is more or less the same, and the people have so much in common. Okay, but they do think of themselves as different. And in the former Yugoslavia, and in the countries that now exist, which represent the former Yugoslavia, so the countries of Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia, etc., religion and ethnicity are always confused, okay? Because if you were a Croat, you were Catholic. So you didn't even have to say you were Catholic, you just say, I'm a Croat, meaning you're Catholic. Or you'd say, I'm Catholic, meaning you're a Croat. They couldn't see the difference. So the same, if you're a Muslim, you're a Bosniak, and vice versa. And if you're a Serb, you're Orthodox. Okay, so they did not make the distinction between religion and race or ethnicity the way we do in other countries. They were just kind of confused and jumbled. So the alleged message is Our Lady is supposed to have said, all religions are equal before my Son. It is you on earth who create divisions. Okay? Now, when we hear a message like this, first of all, we have to understand there's that principle, the sound principle from St. Thomas Aquinas. He says, everything received is received according to the manner of the recipient. Okay, so if I explained to a crowd of people about quantum mechanics or astrophysics, they're all going to understand me according to their own language, vocabulary, and limitations, and their own experiences. And if they then were asked to repeat what have you just learnt and repeated it, each one would repeat it in a way unique to him or her. Okay, so everything received is received according to the manner of the recipient. So if a visionary uses the word religion in Bosnia and Herzegovina, really religion means ethnicity for them. Certainly did at that time. So when all religions are equal before my son, we have to understand it as all ethnicities, all peoples. Because here the objection was, how come a Serb Orthodox was cured? And of course, you have to also wonder why was a Franciscan puzzled by that, because of the I suppose, bad feeling, bad blood, confusion among those people, mutual, perhaps mistrust, I don't know, at that time, and then which was made worse by the war in those countries, in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. And of course, all along, Our Lady was calling for peace between peoples. Okay, so here, this message, all religions are equal, really means all peoples are equal before my son. And that's true. All people are called to salvation in Jesus Christ. That's what it means. Okay. There's another message I think that might be related to this, and I'm not even sure if this is authentic. It's usually raised by objectors to Medjugorje, and I've not been able to find the message in any body or collection of authentic messages from Medjugorje. And it's something like, God is sovereign over all religions, or God rules over all religions. A quote like this. And again, I think we have to understand this, we have to understand it in context. Yeah, God is in charge of all religions, God is in charge of all peoples. That is clear. It doesn't mean that God has willed all religions, actively willed, as though there are different ways to God. There's only one way to God. And when we look at a message like that, we have to look at the context of all the other messages. Is there even remotely a suggestion that the Catholic Church is unnecessary? Is there even remotely a suggestion in all the other messages that you could make your own way to God bypassing Christ and the Church and the sacraments? No, there is not. So it's really unfair to kind of twist one isolated thing out of context and make a mountain out of a molehill, or a mountain out of a non-existent molehill. I think that is deeply unfair, because people who do that don't realize that their ancestors would have done it to Lourdes and Fatima. Okay, let's give an example. Let's try. I hate doing this, but I need to do this to show them that they would easily, if they had been alive at that time, they would have easily done this to Lourdes and Fatima. Lourdes, Our Lady allegedly says, I am the Immaculate Conception. Now you can object, and the pastor at the time did object. How can she say she's the Immaculate Conception? That's an event, okay? Not a person. What does she mean by that? That sounds like nonsense. You could twist it like that. And actually, as I said, the pastor did object and make those objections, precisely those objections. Now, to understand it, Our Lady is saying that whatever you mean by Immaculate Conception, that's me. I'm the one who received God's grace. I'm the recipient of God's lavish grace. So that's why she actually identifies herself with an event, with the beginning of her life. Okay, I mean, it's maybe because we're so used to hearing this, we have to realize how strange it was to the people who heard it at that time. What if Our Lady had said, I am the glorious Assumption? It's as strange as saying that. If Our Lady had said, I am the glorious Assumption, well, what does that mean? But you can twist anything out of context. Now, Fatima, there's more stuff you could twist. For example, in one of Our Lady's messages to Lucia, after the initial events, she said, I am holding back, or sometimes the message is given as, I alone am holding back the hand of God's wrath. Help me with your prayers and sacrifices. We have a quote from Pope Francis more recently where he said, Our Lady does not hold back the hand of God's wrath. So there you have a Pope speaking, and it contradicts an alleged message from Our Lady. What do you believe? Is Fatima fake? Now, we have to, when the Pope spoke and he said, Our Lady does not hold back the hand of God's anger, he's right. Literally, she doesn't. She does not hold back. God literally does not have anger, and neither does Our Lady literally hold back His anger. Now, metaphorically, God does have anger. God's love will manifest as justice sometimes. And that to us, with respect to us, we would call it anger, the righteous anger of God. God does punish out of love. And Our Lady holding back, or Our Lady alone holding back God's anger is an image of Our Lady interceding for us. But it's not like, God, even through His love, wants to punish the world and Our Lady is trying to stop Him. If Our Lady is interceding for us, she does so because God wills her to. From eternity, He has willed for her to intercede with Him, to be our great auxiliatrix, our great helper. She is the mediatrix of all graces. She is the one most intimately united with Christ in His redemption, and she is the great help of Christians. So you see how easy it would be to twist the words of Lourdes and Fatima against those apparitions. I mean, I think it's awful when people just take some things out of context, ignoring the rest of the body of the messages and making it into something that seemingly cannot be reconciled with the Catholic faith. I think that's dishonest, it's not fair, and it's also kind of counterproductive, because that same technique can be used against them and against every other apparition.
And then we must consider the position taken by the various local ordinaries and bishops and their insistence that nothing supernatural is happening at Medjugorje. When Our Lady first allegedly appeared to the 6 youths in 1981, she reportedly told them that she would only appear 3 more times. 3 more times, that's it. She has since appeared, according to the alleged visionaries, nearly 50,000 more times. The local ordinary for the diocese in which Medjugorje is located had this to say not too long ago. He said, quote, "Considering everything that this diocesan chancery has so far researched and studied, including the first 7 days of the alleged apparitions, one can say, quote, there have been no apparitions of Our Lady at Medjugorje," unquote. Furthermore, the same bishop noted that, quote, "the apparitions have been studied by several commissions at a diocesan level, by the Croatian Bishops' Conference. The Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith studied the phenomena on 2 occasions. The local and national commissions arrived at the conclusion that there is nothing supernatural to the apparitions," unquote.
Another objection is, hasn't the Church already condemned Medjugorje? So how could we even go there or listen to it? Now, when we look at how the Church deals with an alleged apparition, there are 3 judgments Holy Mother Church can make. The first category is constat de supernaturalitate, meaning this is established as supernatural. So that's confirming that this place is worthy of belief. Okay. The second category is non-constat de supernaturalitate. It is not established as supernatural, which kind of signals doubt about this. It's not established. It could be supernatural, it could not be, but we're not entirely sure just yet. Okay? And then there's a third category, which is constat de non-supernaturalitate. It is established as non-supernatural. Now, this is complete rejection. This is definitely not from God. This is not supernatural. And it would be a rejection. So you have approval and rejection, and in between you have could be, we're not sure. So Medjugorje belongs to the middle category, because it is true the local bishop there objected to Medjugorje. Bishop Janic, at that time he was the bishop of Mostar, And although he initially said Medjugorje is supernatural and he believed it, etc., initially that was what he said, and then later he changed his mind. Then Holy Mother Church intervened and took away the responsibility for judging Medjugorje in these terms from the local bishop and gave it to all the bishops of Yugoslavia, the country where Medjugorje was in at that time. So it's the Bishops' Conference of Yugoslavia who met in Zadar, it's a coastal town on the Dalmatian coast, in 1991, and they chose the middle ground, that this is not established as supernatural, meaning that they don't know. If they're not approving it, they're not rejecting it. Now, I want to give you a little quote from Pope Benedict about private revelation, just to explain, because he explains so beautifully. He says, church approval of a private revelation essentially means that its message contains nothing contrary to faith and morals. It can be a valuable aid for better understanding and living the gospel at a certain time. Consequently, it should not be treated lightly. It is a help which is proffered, but its use is not obligatory. So he says, first of all, when church approval of an apparition is just basically saying there's nothing in it against our faith and morals. Fine. It's not saying we approve of it 100% and you've got to implement this in your life. No, Holy Mother Church is not saying that. But at the same time, he says it should not be treated lightly. It's a help that's offered, but it is not obligatory. So, I don't know, it's a bit like you're in the sea, splashing around. Someone throws you a life ring or buoy or whatever. It's not obligatory to cling on to it, but if the seas are rough, maybe you'd be better off taking it. It's a help in this sense.
And then we must consider the strong opinion of the bishop and exorcist, namely Monsignor Andrea Gemma, on the topic of Medjugorje. He states very bluntly the following: the apparition at Medjugorje, quote, is an absolutely diabolical event around which numerous underworld interests revolve. I'm referring to the devil's dung, the bishop said, to money. What else? He continued, at Medjugorje, everything happens for the sake of money. Pilgrimages, overnight stays, the sales of things. In this way, abusing the good faith of the poor people who go there with the idea of meeting the Madonna, the false seers have set themselves up financially. They have married and live a wealthy life, to say the least, unquote.
Another objection is that Medjugorje has become too commercialized, that there are too many restaurants and shops in Medjugorje. Now, first of all, I want to know, why is this an objection to the authenticity of the apparitions? And I think people are getting a bit confused when they use this as an objection, because remember that quote from the Bishop of Grenoble says, whatever happens after does not negate the initial authenticity of the phenomenon. So, is Medjugorje too commercialized? First of all, I think people who object to Medjugorje being too commercialized have probably never been to Lourdes. I know Lourdes has a head start on Medjugorje, at least 100 years, 130 years head start on Medjugorje. So things are far more developed in Lourdes. The hotels are huge, huge. There are lots of restaurants, some really fancy restaurants, lots of bars and pubs, even a cinema. All kinds of things are going on in Lourdes. Now, I've been to Lourdes many, many times. And what is true is that if you allow it, you can completely bypass the spiritual aspects of Lourdes, and it would be just like a holiday in the south of France. And sadly, I think some people do treat it that way, and I object to that. But really, that's up to us. We have to go to Lourdes with the proper spirit and try and enter into the spirit of being a pilgrim. And if we do, then we will experience Lourdes. And the same applies to Medjugorje. I think yes, it's possible you could come to Medjugorje and completely bypass all the graces God is giving there. But that's up to you. If you don't like the commercialization, don't shop. Don't go into the shops. If you don't like the restaurants, don't go there. Do not go there. In fact, I'm telling you, honestly, especially the shops on a Sunday, if you disapprove of Sunday trading, and I do not do any shopping on a Sunday there at all. Let them all close. Let them all respect the Lord's day, and shut and keep it as a holy day. Fine. As for the restaurants, I think restaurant is a fancy term for what we have in Medjugorje. They're more like slightly jazzed up cafes. But yeah, none of them are terribly fancy. In fact, when people come, they always say, oh, it's so cheap, everything is so cheap. People have to eat. So there are places that cater for that. But there's not that many. I think it is a shame when a pilgrimage site develops too much. I think it would be better always in all of these places if the bishops took charge, allowed a certain development, and said, please keep the simplicity of the place, or put these other things further away. They are distractions. I don't like them. I don't think they should be in Lourdes or Fatima or Medjugorje or any other shrine. There's one shrine that I know of, which is quite simple, Walsingham in England. It's a 1,000-year-old shrine. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it is really, really, really undeveloped. Especially if you go there in winter, you have to drive at least 20 miles if you want to get lunch, because nothing is open in the village. So that has kept its character. But also that was aided by the Protestants coming and destroying everything there 500 years ago. So that kept it very simple. Okay.
None of the seers have become a religious or a priest. They all make a good living solely from their association with Medjugorje, especially with one quote-unquote visionary whose home in Massachusetts is valued at approximately $1.5 million.
People sometimes object to the lives of the visionaries, as though all the visionaries should have become priests or nuns and pursued a religious vocation. And the fact that they did not in Medjugorje is somehow counted against them and held against them. Now here I think there's a confusion between being a visionary and with actual sanctity. To be a visionary, it's not because they deserve it. It's a grace, freely given. A visionary ought to become a saint, just like all of us ought to become saints. But we shouldn't assume that a visionary is necessarily a saint. Saint Bernadette really is quite exceptional. She showed a lot of prudence, wisdom, care. The other thing is, I said visionaries are not necessarily saints. We have to leave that space, Again, Saint Bernadette was lucky because she did not want to remain in Lourdes. She wanted to escape the crowds, and also the bishop and her family and the local pastor all had the wisdom to say, we need to move her out of Lourdes before she becomes a freak show. Okay, so she was lucky to escape. It was sad for her because she could never see Lourdes again. Her last apparition, because the apparitions began in February, March. And her last apparition is one that few people know about. It happened in July that year, where the crowds were already so big, she was already a celebrity. So she had to sneak in on the other side of the Gave, the river. And she looked at the grotto, and Our Lady appeared. And they were there, it's like 100, 200 yards apart. And they just smiled at each other and bowed. That was the last apparition she had, because she couldn't go up to the grotto because of the crowds. It's sad, it's poignant, but it kind of shows what could happen to a visionary. Now, I want to look at one particular apparition, La Salette in France, which happened just before Lourdes, where such wisdom did not apply. The mission of the shepherds is ended. The shepherds are the children, Melanie and Maxima. That of the church begins. They can move away, become dispersed in the world, even unfaithful to the great grace received. But the apparition of Mary will not thereby be shaken, for it is certain, and nothing coming after can act against it. And notice his wisdom. He says the apparitions are real, it's a great grace, and the visionaries might even be unfaithful afterwards, but that does not negate the reality of La Salette. And it's kind of prophetic he said that, because the two visionaries lived slightly chaotic lives. It's not their fault, I don't think. They were the first celebrity visionaries that we really know of, because people hounded them and chased them, elevated them to this great status. They didn't want it, but it had its effect. So what happened is that Melanie, the girl, she joined 4 different orders, religious orders, and she left all of them. She was dispensed from her vows, and then she died in a private house in Naples with a friend. And that's how her life came to an end. The boy, Maxima, is an even sadder story, because he flunked out of high school. He tried to become a doctor, that failed. He joined the army temporarily, then he was dismissed from that. He tried to train as a pharmacist, that didn't work out. And then he lent his name to a fellow who made liquor, kind of cashing in on the visionary fame. And this guy made a lot of money with the liquor, but cheated Maxima. And Maxima himself is supposed to have died penniless, alcoholic. He died in a state of grace, having received the last sacraments, but he was penniless and alcoholic. Like, really what the world would look at and say, this is a failure. This is not exactly how you expect visionaries to end up, but this is what happened to the two of them, because they are hounded and treated like celebrities. So we have to remember, visionaries are human beings. They're not saints. They're called to be saints, just like we are. We have to leave them alone.
The alleged seer's spiritual director in the past was a Father Vlasic, who was laicized for sins of impurity, and was ruled guilty of promoting doubtful doctrine, guilty of manipulating consciences, guilty of suspect mysticism, guilty of disobedience towards lawful superiors. According to the pseudo-visionaries, the Gaspa, forgive me, giggles at times. She makes her appearances according to the whims of the visionaries and can be canceled if there is a scheduling conflict. The Gaspa goes through wardrobe changes and lets people step on her robe at times, even becoming grubby in appearance due to those who touch her. The Gospel, we're told, almost dropped the infant Jesus. The idol moves up and down, we are told, at the behest of the seers who seemingly control her movements.
Sometimes people object and say, well, the Blessed Virgin Mary does not make appointments, because in Medjugorje she appears at certain fixed times and dates prearranged. And they hold this as an objection against the authenticity of Medjugorje. Well, I think it's quite practical, because if she wants to appear to you, you have to make sure that you're there and not elsewhere, like gone to your doctor's appointment or gone bowling or something. Like what Juan Diego, especially, she says, come back, same time, same place. And he wants to go back, but his uncle is sick. So the next day, he actually takes a detour. He tries to avoid her. And then she comes down the mountain and catches him and says, where are you going? So when she says, come and meet me at this time and place, she's quite serious. And we ought to take that seriously. Lord, she says, will you do me the great grace of coming here for 15 days? So she makes an appointment. And Fatima, she says, come back here for 6 months on the 13th of every month. So from all this, we see that the Mother of God is perfectly capable of making appointments and appearing at a predetermined place and time of her choosing. So that doesn't sound like a valid objection to say, well, no, the Mother of God doesn't do that. Well, we've seen that she does.
But for this talk, I would like to note especially the statue of Our Lady of Medjugorje. That is, the way Our Lady is depicted in the statue is of great interest. You see, the statue of the Gospel wears a long dress and a light veil upon her head. Her feet are covered by the dress, and the cloud she floats on also completely covers her feet. In other words, those feet, that heel in particular, crushing the head of the serpent with an apple in its mouth, that heel, that foot is completely covered up. Satan both hates and fears the heel of Our Lady's foot, so her feet must be covered up. And believe me, the covering up of the feet of the gospel is significant, for the gospel serves the serpent, but would never crush him. In the inerrant sacred history of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 to be exact, we have what is sometimes referred to as the proto-gospel, the first indication of the redemption of mankind from sin. After the original sin, there is the promise of the child and the mother who will give him birth. But there's also an enemy relationship established. The text of Genesis 3:15 shows Almighty God addressing the serpent in the following words, quote, "I will put enmities between thee and the woman, and thy seed and her seed. She shall crush thy head, and thou shalt lie in wait for her heel," unquote. Much of Marian artwork, at least in the West, depicts the serpent under the foot of Our Lady. Heaven itself confirmed this image when the Mother of God appeared to St. Catherine Labouré in 1830. There were various elements of this vision, and among them was an image of a serpent crushed under Mary's feet. Satan has never had any power over her, and has always been crushed by her from the moment of her conception onwards. And that is why on December 8th, 1854, the very feast of the Immaculate Conception, Blessed Pius IX solemnly and infallibly declared the following, quote, "We define that the doctrine which holds the Blessed Virgin Mary at the first instant of her conception by a singular privilege of grace of the omnipotent God, in consideration of the merits of Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind, was, keyword, was preserved free from all stain of original sin," unquote. But then the same Holy Father added, quote, "The Most Holy Virgin united with him, Christ, by a most intimate and indissoluble bond, was with him and through him eternally at enmity with the evil serpent, and most completely triumphed over him, and thus crushed his head with her immaculate foot," unquote.
I couldn't find a video from Father Leon on the feet being covered, but I do have a photo of the statue on Apparition Hill, which is the main statue where people seem to go to Medjugorje. And at the end of the month, I will bring up the question of the feet covered. But the statue of Our Lady in Medjugorje on Apparition Hill does have the feet uncovered, very similar to the statue in Knock. Okay, so I know I've heard this before, that if you want to know if an apparition of Our Lady is real, always look to see if her feet are uncovered, because the devil can't appear in the form of Our Lady. If he tries to, his feet are always covered. I've heard that before a few times. But just to be clear, the statue in Medjugorje and Apparition Hill, the feet of Our Lady are uncovered, and the same in Knock. So I'm just jumping in there, as again, I'm just looking at both sides of this argument. Okay. I'm going to post a link now to the whole talk, because the last 5 minutes, Father Scallon there at the Fatima Centre, he's not talking specifically about Medjugorje. So you can just go and listen to it. And again, I'm just giving you both sides. There was one thing that he mentioned, the Fatima Centre, he mentioned the Franciscan priests. And I've seen that before. And what my thoughts are on this, if you look at who are the priests in Medjugorje today, Father Leon and these other priests, Our Lady has a way of of changing lives, of changing places. And, it's good to see a Dominican there, and grace has flown, grace has built up. And as I said, I need to be clear, because people are going to come at me from both sides, the pro and the anti. Stick with the church. Know your faith. Always go with what's proven Catholic teaching in the church. The Eucharist, Our Lady, the Rosary. Okay? If you know those, and Medjugorje turns out to be fake or false, fake or real, if it turns out to be whatever it is, your faith is not going to be shaken. And but if it is true, it's great. When I'm going there, I will be going with some friends of mine, and we will pray together. Some friends, some men that I know, and my daughter. We will pray together, and we'll try and increase the graces in our life. We're going to use what is age-old Catholic teaching in the church. We're going to avail of the sacraments, go to confession, and dig into our faith. I don't know anything about the apparitions, to be honest, and I won't be chasing the seers. I have no interest. I have zero interest. Either way, I'm sure we'll have to let the church decide. But I'm just gonna do what I always do: pray, go to adoration, and let what I know to be true of my faith fill me. Anyway, so this video, I hope people are okay with it. This is the Fatima Center video, and I've put the Father Leon's and some of my own comments on it. I have no skin in the game either way on this. Okay, but I just thought I'd put it out there since 2 people have sent me the video. So I just thought I'd show it out there. And just pray for the church. Pray for the church. You don't need to go to Medjugorje to be saved. You have the fullness of the faith in any church in Ireland. In the Eucharist, adoration, rosary, confession. Go to traditional Latin Mass in Ireland. Go to traditional Latin Mass. Encounter Christ at Calvary. Go to confession, and let the graces flow forth. Why I asked you to go to traditional Latin Mass, you will always find a confessor before Mass at traditional Latin Mass in Ireland. It's simply, you will always there. It was a beautiful tradition, and go there, avail of confession, and get all the graces from the Eucharist that you can get, and grow your spiritual life. Okay, God bless. Take care. Bye bye.